3. They married her to silence him by making her the price of truth. She didn't know it yet, neither did he. But the territorial judge who signed the certificate understood exactly what he'd created. A legal trap where speaking would kill what staying silent would slowly destroy. This isn't a story about love. It's about two people discovering they were never the enemy, just weapons aimed at each other by men who profit from buried bodies. Arizona Territory, 1877. The massacre happened on a Tuesday, which seemed wrong to Catherine Wells, because Tuesdays were laundry days, and death should have more ceremony than that. She'd been gathering herbs along Sycamore Creek 2 miles from Fort Huachuca when she heard the shots. Not battle sounds, executions, methodical, spaced. 12 shots, then silence heavy enough to choke on. Catherine was 24, pale-haired, unremarkable in most ways, except for an inconvenient habit of being exactly where she shouldn't be. Orphaned at 16 when cholera took her parents, she'd worked as a post laundress for 8 years, invisible to everyone except when they needed clean shirts. The army wives barely acknowledged her. The enlisted men saw through her. The officers looked past her to things that mattered. She should have stayed hidden in the mesquite. Should have pretended she'd heard nothing, seen nothing. But something in those methodical shots pulled her forward, and she crawled to the ridge overlooking the dry wash. 12 Apache men on their knees, 12 bullet wounds to the back of the head, and Captain Marcus Hendricks standing over them with a smoking pistol while his men searched the bodies, taking what little they had. Not a battle, not a skirmish. An execution of prisoners who'd come in under white flag for the treaty talks Hendricks had promised. Catherine's hand found her mouth too late. The small gasp carried in the desert silence. Hendricks's head snapped up. His eyes found hers across 50 yards of scrub and stone. For 3 seconds they stared at each other. Killer and witness. And Catherine saw him calculating. Saw him decide. "Corporal Davis," Hendricks called, never breaking eye contact with Catherine. "Retrieve that woman. Carefully. She's had a terrible shock witnessing these hostiles attack our patrol." Catherine ran. Crashed through brush that tore her dress and skin. Made it maybe 200 yards before Davis caught her arm with surprising gentleness. "Don't make this harder, miss," he said quietly. "Captain wants to make sure you're safe. That's all." That wasn't all. That would never be all. But Davis's grip was iron disguised as courtesy, and Catherine went. Hendricks smiled at her like a concerned officer worried about a civilian's welfare. "Miss Wells, thank goodness you're unharmed. That was very dangerous, wandering so far from the fort. These Apache are unpredictable. They attacked without warning. You saw them attack us, didn't you?" Catherine's mouth was dry as sand. Every instinct screamed at her to agree, to parrot whatever lie he wanted. But something in those 12 kneeling bodies wouldn't let her. "They were already dead," she whispered. "You shot them while they were on their knees." Hendricks's smile never wavered. "I think the shock has confused you. Corporal Davis, help Miss Wells back to the fort. I'm sure the post surgeon can provide something to calm her nerves." The threat underneath the courtesy was sharp as the knife Catherine felt pressing against her future. She'd seen something powerful men wanted buried, and she had no protection, no family, no status worth defending. She was 24 years old, alone in the world, and she'd just made herself inconvenient to a man who solved problems with bullets. What she didn't know, what Hendricks had already determined during that 3-second stare, was that killing her would raise questions. A laundress found dead near a battle site would trigger investigations, would bring scrutiny to the skirmish he'd report, would threaten the comfortable arrangement he had going with Silas Crenshaw, the fort sutler who paid handsomely for Apache horses and weapons Hendricks provided through carefully staged encounters. Dead witnesses created problems, but silenced witnesses, legally bound and socially isolated, could be managed indefinitely. Hendricks had spent the walk back to the fort calculating solutions. By the time Catherine reached the post surgeon's office, he'd already sent word to Territorial Judge Warren Blackwood. By evening, the solution had taken shape. The judge arrived the next morning with documents already prepared. Catherine was summoned to the post commandant's office, where she found Hendricks, Judge Blackwood, and Major Keating. the post commander who had 30 years of not noticing things that would complicate his pension. "Miss Wells," Judge Blackwood began, his voice carrying the false warmth of legal authority. "We've heard about your distressing experience yesterday. Captain Hendricks has expressed concern for your welfare." "Has he?" Catherine said flatly. "Indeed," the judge continued. "The frontier is dangerous for unprotected women, and given certain sensitivities regarding what you believe you witnessed, we've developed a proposal that serves everyone's interests." He slid papers across the desk. "Marriage certificate, witness affidavit, property deed." "You'll marry one of the Apache scouts," Blackwood explained. "His name is Neshoba. He's from the Chiricahua band, currently serving as tracker for the fort. Well regarded by his people. The marriage will provide you protection and status. In exchange, you'll sign this affidavit stating that yesterday's incident was a justified military action against hostiles who broke treaty terms." Catherine's hands shook as she picked up the papers. "And if I refuse?" "Then we'll have to address certain irregularities in your employment," Major Keating said, speaking for the first time. "The post quartermaster has raised concerns about missing supplies, specifically medical alcohol that you would have had access to as a laundress. I never took—" "Nevertheless, the accusation exists," Keating interrupted, "and investigations into theft are quite serious. Court-martial proceedings, possible imprisonment. Very unfortunate for everyone." The frame was perfect. Agree to marry and sign the false affidavit, or face destruction through fabricated charges. "Why marriage?" Catherine asked. "Why not just make me sign the affidavit and be done with it?" Judge Blackwood smiled. "Because married women's legal testimony requires their husband's permission. Once you're Neshoba's wife, any statement you make about that day, any testimony you might give to investigators or journalists, requires his consent, and Neshoba understands that his position, his access to work, his people's relationship with the fort, all depend on cooperation." The trap clicked into focus. Marry the scout, become legally silenced, try to speak anyway, and her husband's position becomes leverage. His people's welfare becomes threat. She'd be bound to someone whose entire world could be destroyed if she told the truth. "And Neshoba agreed to this?" Catherine asked. "He did," Blackwood confirmed. "He approached Captain Hendricks requesting this marriage specifically. Said he admired your character, wanted to formalize an existing relationship." The lie tasted like copper in Catherine's mouth. She'd seen Neshoba around the fort, a quiet man in his late 20s with watchful eyes who moved through spaces like smoke, present but unnoticed. They'd never spoken beyond basic courtesy. He had no reason to want this marriage, unless he'd been told the same lies, unless they were both being manipulated into chains disguised as protection. "When?" Catherine whispered. "This afternoon," Blackwood replied. "I'll perform the ceremony myself. Everything is already arranged." Catherine looked at the papers, at her name in Blackwood's script, at the space waiting for her signature. She thought about 12 men kneeling in dust, about methodical shots and Hendricks's calculating stare, about having nowhere to run and no one who would believe a laundress over an officer. She signed. What she didn't see, what happened simultaneously 8 miles away at the Apache scout camp, would have changed nothing. But it would have helped her understand who the real enemy was. Neshoba learned about his marriage the same way he learned most things the army wanted him to know, through blunt announcement disguised as opportunity. Captain Hendricks arrived at the scout camp with 2 armed privates and an expression that mixed authority with something uglier. "Neshoba, you're getting married." Neshoba set down the saddle he'd been repairing. Around him, the other scouts went still. "I have asked for no wife." "That's not what the judge says," Hendricks replied. "He has your mark on a petition. You requested to marry the post laundress, Catherine Wells, said you'd been courting her secretly and wanted to make it proper." Neshoba's jaw tightened. "I have made no mark. I have spoken to this woman only once, when she brought clean shirts to the camp." "Well, she says otherwise," Hendricks continued. "Says you've been meeting her after dark. Says she's carrying your child and needs a husband immediately." The lie hit like a fist. "That is not truth." "Maybe not," Hendricks agreed. "But it's what she told the judge, and what she'll tell the territorial authorities if you refuse. Do you understand what happens to Apache men accused of forcing themselves on white women? Neshoba understood perfectly. He'd seen men hanged for less, seen whole bands punished for individual accusations. Truth didn't matter when convenient lies protected white interests. Why would she lie? Neshoba asked, though he already knew. She wouldn't. Which meant Hendricks was lying about what she'd said, just as he'd lied about Neshoba's petition. Who knows why white women do anything? Hendricks replied with casual cruelty. Maybe she sees you as a useful husband. Maybe she's trying to gain protection. Maybe she just wants to make her bastard legitimate. Point is, she's made the claim. Judge believes her. And if you refuse, there will be consequences. For me. For your people, Hendricks corrected. The scout's contract comes up for renewal next month. The army relies on your tracking skills. But if one of you is causing trouble with white women, making false promises, behaving inappropriately, well, that raises questions about employing any of you. Your people need the work, the money, the protection having jobs here provides. There it was. Agree to the marriage, or watch his band lose everything. The scouts' pay supported 30 families, kept them fed during lean times, gave them reason for the army to tolerate their presence when other bands were being hunted or forced onto reservations. Refuse, and Hendricks would make certain that protection vanished. And if she truly wants this? Neshoba asked. If she has asked for me? Then you're lucky, Hendricks said. White wife gives you status. Access to places you wouldn't normally go. Could be useful for everyone. The words carried implications Neshoba didn't fully understand yet. But he understood enough. This marriage wasn't about Catherine wanting him or him wanting her. It was about control. About binding them together for purposes that served Hendricks, not them. When? Neshoba asked, tasting defeat. This afternoon. Judge is already at the fort. Everything's arranged. Neshoba looked at the other scouts, at the men whose families depended on this work, at the impossible choice between his freedom and their survival. I will do this, he said. But understand, I do it to protect my people. Not because I want a wife who lies to judges about me. Don't much care why you do it, Hendricks replied. Just be at the post chapel at 3. And Neshoba? Make sure you understand that once you're married, your wife's testimony about anything becomes your responsibility. If she says things that embarrass the army, hurt fort operations, or cause problems for officers, that's on you. You'll be held accountable for her words. Keep her quiet, and everyone benefits. Let her run her mouth, and everyone suffers. The threat was explicit. Catherine would be Neshoba's legal responsibility. And if she spoke about what she'd seen, Hendricks would destroy them both. After Hendricks left, the other scouts gathered close. His cousin Kuruk spoke first. This is trap. Yes, Neshoba agreed. You could refuse. Run. Take the consequences. And let 30 families starve? Neshoba asked. Let the band lose protection? For what? My pride? For your freedom, Kuruk replied. Freedom is already gone, Neshoba said bitterly. We track for the men who hunt our people. We take pay from those who steal our land. We bow and cooperate and pretend it's choice. This marriage is just one more chain. At least it protects others. And the woman? Another scout asked. If she truly asked for this, if she truly carries your child. She does not, Neshoba interrupted. I have never touched her. Never spoken more than greeting. Hendricks lies. The question is whether she lies too, or whether she's been trapped the same way. He would know soon enough. In 3 hours he'd stand before a judge and bind himself to a woman who either wanted to use him or had been forced to accept him. Either way, he would make certain she understood. This marriage existed to serve Hendricks's purposes, and Neshoba would not pretend otherwise. Let her see the resentment in his eyes. Let her know that whatever she'd gained through manipulation, it came at the cost of his freedom and his people's security. Neither of them knew yet that they'd been made weapons against each other, that the marriage was designed to ensure their mutual destruction if either fought back, that Hendricks had forged documents, lied to both, and created perfect distrust to keep them from ever uniting against him. The trap was elegant, and in 2 hours it would snap shut on both of them. The ceremony took place in the post chapel, a rough-built structure that smelled of pine and dust. Catherine wore the same dress she'd worn yesterday gathering herbs, because she had nothing else and refused to pretend this was anything but a cage. Neshoba wore traditional clothing, buckskin shirt, dark pants, his hair bound back in the way of his people. A deliberate rejection of the uniform scouts sometimes wore, a statement Catherine couldn't quite read but felt in her bones. Judge Blackwood performed the ceremony with practiced efficiency. Behind them, Captain Hendricks watched with the satisfaction of a man who'd solved a problem cleverly. "Do you, Catherine Wells, take this man?" "Yes," Catherine said before he finished. She couldn't bear to hear the lies drawn out. "And do you, Neshoba, take this woman?" "I do." The words came out flat, empty of everything except resignation. "Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you married. May God have mercy on your arrangement." The last phrase made Catherine's skin crawl. Not, "May God bless your union." Mercy on your arrangement. Even the judge knew this was something requiring divine intervention. Hendricks approached as witnesses dispersed. "Congratulations, Neshoba. You'll move into the married scout quarters, the cabin near the north wall. Mrs. Neshoba's belongings have already been transferred." "Mrs. Neshoba?" Catherine repeated softly. Even her name had been taken. "You'll report to me weekly," Hendricks continued, looking at Catherine now, "about your husband's activities, who he speaks with, what the scouts discuss, any concerns about loyalty or cooperation. Consider it part of your new duties as an officer's asset." Catherine stared at him. "You want me to spy on my own husband?" "I want you to be useful," Hendricks replied. "You signed an affidavit stating yesterday was a justified action. That affidavit protects everyone, me, you, your husband, his people. But affidavits can be revised. If new information comes to light suggesting the original statement was coerced. I'd hate for that to happen. Investigations are so disruptive." He let that sink in. "So you'll report weekly. And Neshoba, you'll make certain your wife stays quiet about anything she thinks she saw. Because if she talks to the wrong people, asks the wrong questions, makes accusations that damage fort operations, well, that would be your failure as a husband. And we'd have to address whether employing scouts who can't control their own households is in the Army's best interest." The trap was complete. Catherine was bound to spy on Neshoba. Neshoba was bound to silence Catherine, and both were leveraged against each other's survival. After Hendricks left, they walked in silence to the cabin. It was small, single room, with a sleeping area separated by a canvas screen and a main space containing a table, 2 chairs, and a fireplace that had seen better days. Catherine's 3 trunks sat unopened near the door. Her entire life reduced to boxes in a stranger's prison. Neshoba stood by the window, looking out at the fort walls. "Why did you ask for this?" Catherine turned to face him. "I didn't. Hendricks told me you petitioned to marry me, that you wanted a white wife for protection." They stared at each other. Understanding dawned cold and terrible. "He lied," Catherine whispered. "To both of us." "Yes," Neshoba agreed. "The question is why." Before Catherine could answer, footsteps approached. Major Keating entered without knocking, a violation that made clear exactly how little privacy they would have. "Just making certain you're both settled," Keating said, "and to remind you that married scout quarters are subject to inspection. Weekly. We like to ensure proper living conditions for our employees and their families." Translation: "We'll be monitoring you constantly. No private conversations, no planning, no chance to unite against us." "Understood, sir," Catherine said, because refusing would accomplish nothing. After Keating left, Neshoba finally looked directly at her. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but something in them suggested calculation rather than hatred. "They made us weapons," he said quietly, pointed at each other. "If you speak about what you saw, they destroy me and my people. If I let you speak, they destroy you. Perfect trap." "And if we do nothing?" Catherine asked. Then 12 men stay buried in a lie, Neshoba replied, and Hendricks continues whatever scheme required their deaths. Catherine moved to the table, sat heavily. I was gathering herbs, that's all. Just collecting plants for dye, and I heard shots. Her voice cracked. They were already on their knees, 12 of them, hands bound, and Hendricks he executed them like it was nothing. Neshoba was very still. You are certain? 12 men, hands bound? Yes. Why? Because 12 warriors left my band 6 days ago, Neshoba said slowly. To meet with Hendricks about peace talks, about ending raids that we never committed but that army claims we did. They went under white flag, under promise of safe negotiation. Catherine's stomach dropped. Those were your people? My cousins, my uncle, my brother. Neshoba's voice was controlled, but something beneath it shook with grief held too tight. They went to talk peace, and your captain murdered them for whatever they carried, whatever he could sell. I'm so sorry, Catherine whispered. Sorry? Neshoba's control cracked. You people destroy everything, take land, break promises, murder those who trust your words, and then marry us to your victims to keep us silent about it. I'm not you people, Catherine said, anger rising to meet his. I'm an orphaned laundress with no family, no power, no options. Hendricks threatened to frame me for theft if I didn't marry you. I'm as trapped as you are. You are white, Neshoba replied. That means you are never as trapped as me. It was true and not true, and too complicated to argue in a cabin that would be inspected weekly by men looking for reason to destroy them both. What do we do? Catherine asked. Neshoba was quiet for a long moment. We play their game. You report to Hendricks whatever meaningless things I tell you to report. I keep you from speaking about the massacre. We make them believe they have won. And while they believe it, we find evidence of what Hendricks truly does. Why 12 men had to die. Evidence? Silas Crenshaw, Neshoba said. The sutler. He buys and sells goods, sometimes goods that should not exist for purchase. Apache weapons, horses, things that come from raids or battles. I have seen Hendricks meet with him late at night. Seen goods exchanged. If we can prove Hendricks is selling stolen property, murdering to obtain it, we might have weapon to use against him. It was a slim hope, but it was more than Catherine had expected. They'll be watching us, she said, waiting for us to conspire. Then we do not conspire, Neshoba replied. We live as they expect, quietly, resentfully, 2 people forced together, barely speaking, certainly not planning, while we watch and wait and gather what we need. Catherine looked at this man she'd been bound to through lies. This stranger who'd lost 12 family members to a captain's greed and who'd been forced to marry their witness as punishment. I won't spy for him, she said. I won't really report on you. You will, Neshoba corrected. You will report exactly what I tell you to report, because if you do not, he will know we are working together. And then everything becomes worse. He was right. To fight the trap, they had to pretend to be caught in it. I don't know how to do this, Catherine admitted. Neither do I, Neshoba replied. But we learn. Because the alternative is letting my brother's deaths mean nothing, and I cannot accept that. Outside, the fort bell rang for evening formation. Inside, 2 people forced into marriage sat across a table and began the impossible work of figuring out how to survive what came next. The marriage was a weapon. The binding was chains. The future was uncertain. But at least they knew the truth now. And that would have to be enough. Because the only other option was surrender. And neither of them had that in their nature. Morning came with the sound of boots outside their cabin. The weekly inspection starting early. A reminder that privacy was an illusion. Major Keating entered with a corporal, scanning the room with eyes trained to find violations. Everything in order? Keating asked, though it wasn't really a question. Yes, sir, Catherine replied, standing beside the table where she'd been making coffee. Keating's gaze lingered on the sleeping area, the single set of blankets, the careful distance Catherine and Neshoba maintained even when trying to appear natural. Good. Marriage takes adjustment. I'm sure you'll find your rhythm. After they left, Neshoba exhaled slowly. They look for proof we are not truly married. If they believe the marriage is false, they can dissolve it. Then you lose protection of being wife, and I lose leverage over your silence. So we need to appear. Catherine couldn't finish the sentence. Bound, Neshoba completed. Not happy. Just bound. They expect resentment. That fits their narrative. But we must seem like we are. Tolerating the arrangement. It was a performance neither of them wanted to give. But necessity didn't care about comfort. Catherine spent her days working laundry. Her position hadn't changed, only her status. The fort wives treated her differently now, with a mixture of fascination and disgust. Married to a scout, living in native quarters, gone to the other side. Mrs. Hendricks, the captain's wife, was particularly cold. I hope you understand what you've done, she said one day at the washing stations. Marrying that savage. You'll never be accepted in proper society again. I was never in proper society, Catherine replied evenly. I'm a laundress. We're invisible to proper society until you need clean linens. Mrs. Hendricks's face flushed. Well, I'm sure you'll be very happy with your choice. The emphasis on choice made clear that everyone knew this hadn't been Catherine's decision. The entire fort buzzed with gossip. The laundress forced to marry a scout after being caught in inappropriate circumstances. The details varied by storyteller, but the core remained. Catherine had done something wrong, and this marriage was her punishment disguised as protection. Let them think it. Let them believe she'd been disgraced. It made her less interesting, less worth watching closely. But Captain Hendricks was watching. Always. He summoned her weekly to his office, a practice that made her skin crawl every time. Tell me about the scouts, he'd say. What are they planning? Any talk of leaving? Any dissatisfaction? Catherine would recite the carefully prepared information Neshoba had given her. Mundane details. Complaints about rations. Discussion of hunting grounds. Nothing important. Nothing true. Nothing useful. And Hendricks would listen, make notes, and dismiss her with reminders that her cooperation was appreciated and her husband's position was secure as long as she remained helpful. The trap worked perfectly from his perspective. Two people bound and controlled, neither able to act without destroying the other. What Hendricks didn't see, what he was too confident to look for, was the slow, careful investigation happening in the margins of their performance. Neshoba was a scout. He knew how to track prey without being noticed. And now he was tracking Hendricks's routine, his meetings, his late-night visits to the sutler's warehouse. Catherine was a laundress. She had access to officers' quarters, their private spaces, the discarded papers they thought no one read. And she began keeping careful documentation of what she found. Invoices that didn't match inventory. Supply records showing goods that appeared and disappeared without authorization. Letters discussing transactions that shouldn't exist. They never discussed these things in the cabin. The walls were too thin, the inspections too frequent. Instead, they developed a careful system of signals. Catherine would hang laundry in specific patterns. Extra shirts meant she'd found something useful. Neshoba would leave stones arranged near the woodpile. Configurations that told her where he'd hidden documents for her to review. It was slow, painfully slow. But evidence began to accumulate. Hendricks was selling Apache property, weapons, horses, jewelry taken from the 12 murdered warriors. He'd arranged their deaths specifically to obtain these goods. The peace talks had been a setup from the beginning. He'd invited them to negotiate, then executed them and claimed they'd attacked first. The 12 families who'd lost fathers and brothers would never know this, wouldn't understand that their loved ones had been murdered not for military necessity, but for Captain Hendricks's profit margin. Unless Catherine and Neshoba could prove it. 6 weeks after the wedding, Catherine found the document that changed everything. She'd been collecting officer laundry when she noticed a paper fallen behind Major Keating's desk. A letter from Territorial Governor Anson Safford to Captain Hendricks, dated 3 days before the massacre. The letter referenced cleaning up loose ends regarding Apache problems and ensuring valuable property doesn't fall into wrong hands. It didn't explicitly order murder, but it suggested awareness of planned action, suggested complicity. Catherine's hands shook as she read it. This wasn't just Hendricks operating independently. This went higher. Governor Safford might know, might even have authorized it. She refolded the letter, tucked it into her apron, and finished collecting laundry like nothing had happened. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. That evening, she and Neshoba walked together outside the fort walls, a performance of a married couple taking air, carefully noted by the guards. They walked far enough that voices wouldn't carry, close enough that they could return quickly if questioned. "The governor knows," Catherine said quietly. "I found a letter. He's involved." Neshoba's jaw tightened. "Then going to military authorities will accomplish nothing. They serve the governor." "What about civilian authorities? There's a federal marshal in Tucson." "Who answers to territorial government?" Neshoba replied. "And who will believe a laundress and a scout over a captain and a governor?" "Then what?" Catherine asked. "We have evidence of murder and theft, and nowhere to take it that matters?" Neshoba was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun set over mountains that had once been free territory and were now just lines on maps made by men who'd never walked this land. "There is someone," he said finally. "A journalist, from the Eastern papers. He came through the territory last year writing about Indian affairs. He stays in Tucson sometimes, at the Congress Hotel. His name is Edwin Porter. He writes stories that embarrass government officials, stories that get reprinted, that create pressure." "You think he'd believe us?" Catherine asked. "I think he needs a story," Neshoba replied. "And we have a very good story. 12 murdered men, a captain selling stolen goods, a governor who authorized cleanup, a forced marriage to silence witnesses. If we can get him the documents, he might publish it." "Getting to Tucson means leaving the fort," Catherine said, "which means permission from Hendricks, which he'll never grant if he suspects anything." "Then we do not ask permission," Neshoba replied. "We leave without it. I am a scout. I know how to move without being tracked. You are my wife now. If we leave together, they might think we simply decided to abandon fort life. By the time they realize we went to Tucson with documents, it will be too late to stop publication." It was risky. Desertion from scout service was punishable. Leaving without permission would mark them as fugitives. And if they failed, if the journalist wouldn't help, or if Hendricks caught them before they reached Tucson. "He'll kill us," Catherine said. "If he catches us with those documents, he won't bother with trials. He'll just make us disappear like he made those 12 men disappear." "Yes," Neshoba agreed, "so we do not get caught." They walked back to the cabin in silence. Inside, Catherine spread out the documents she'd collected over 6 weeks. Supply records, invoices, the governor's letter, her own written account of what she'd witnessed. "We need one more thing," Neshoba said, studying the papers. "Direct proof of sale. Something showing Crenshaw paying Hendricks for Apache property." "How do we get that?" "Crenshaw keeps ledgers," Neshoba replied. "I have seen them in his office at the sutler's store. If we can access them during one of his late-night meetings with Hendricks, while they are both distracted." "You want to break into the sutler's office while Hendricks is there meeting with him?" Catherine asked. "That's insane." "It is necessary," Neshoba corrected. "And you would not break in. You are a laundress. You deliver clean linens to the sutler's store. If you happen to enter while Crenshaw is occupied in back, if you happen to look through papers on his desk, no one would question laundress doing her job." It was terrifying, and it might work. 2 nights later, Neshoba confirmed through Scout Network that Hendricks would meet Crenshaw after dark. Another transaction, another exchange of goods for gold. Catherine carried a basket of folded linens to the sutler's store just as the meeting began. She could hear Hendricks's voice from the back room, discussing prices, quantities, delivery schedules. The ledger was on Crenshaw's desk, exactly where Neshoba said it would be. Catherine set down her basket, opened to the most recent entries, and scanned quickly. 3 pages of transactions dated after the massacre. Apache goods, 12 horses, 8 rifles, massacre, jewelry, and hides. Paid H. Hendricks, $240 gold. There it was, direct proof. Purchase of property from 12 murdered men, bought by the sutler, sold by the captain who'd killed them to obtain it. Catherine's hands shook as she copied the entry into her apron pocket notebook. Dates, amounts, items, everything. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned to find Crenshaw standing in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to calculation. "Mrs. Nashoba," he said carefully, "I wasn't expecting laundry delivery this late." Catherine forced her voice steady. "Captain Hendricks wanted fresh linens for morning inspection. I thought I'd bring them by to save time tomorrow." "How thoughtful," Crenshaw replied, moving closer to his desk. His eyes went to the ledger, still open, to Catherine's position beside it. "Find anything interesting?" "Sir?" "In my ledger," Crenshaw clarified. "You were reading it." Catherine's mouth went dry. "I was just setting down the linens and it was open. I apologize if that was inappropriate." "Very inappropriate," Crenshaw agreed. "Makes me wonder what you might have seen. What you might remember about dates and numbers that are none of your concern." From the back room, Hendricks's voice called out. "Crenshaw? Everything all right?" "Just Mrs. Nashoba delivering linens," Crenshaw called back. Then, quieter to Catherine, "You should leave now, and you should forget whatever you think you saw. Because women who remember the wrong things tend to have accidents on this frontier." The threat was explicit. Catherine grabbed her basket and left, pulse hammering in her ears. She made it back to the cabin without running, without drawing attention. But inside, she collapsed into a chair, shaking. Nashoba took one look at her and knew. "What happened?" "Crenshaw caught me," Catherine said. "He knows I saw the ledger. He threatened me. And if he tells Hendricks—" "Then we leave tonight," Nashoba interrupted. "Not tomorrow. Not when we have more proof. Tonight, before Crenshaw decides we are too dangerous to leave alive. We're not ready—" "We are ready enough," Nashoba said. "You have documents. I have statement from scouts who saw goods being transported. We have enough to make a story. We leave now, or we die here." He was right. They'd been discovered. The trap was closing. Stay, and they'd be eliminated quietly, blamed for their own deaths, tragic accident, attack by hostiles, whatever lie served Hendricks's purposes. They packed in silence. Minimal supplies. Documents hidden in layers of Catherine's clothing. At midnight, when the guards were changing shifts, they slipped through a gap in the fort wall that Nashoba had been widening gradually for weeks. The desert at night was cold and infinite. Catherine had never been further than 5 miles from a settlement in her life. Now she was fleeing into darkness with a man she barely knew, carrying evidence of murder, hoping to reach a city 40 miles away before someone discovered they were gone. They walked until dawn, avoiding roads, following paths Nashoba knew from scouting. When light came, they hid in a dry wash, taking turns sleeping while the other watched for pursuit. "They will have noticed by now," Nashoba said. "Morning inspection would have found empty cabin. Hendricks will send riders." "How long until they catch us?" Catherine asked. "Depends if they send scouts or soldiers," Nashoba replied. "Scouts will track faster. But they might not want other scouts to know what happened. Might send soldiers instead, who will be slower but more willing to shoot first." "Comforting," Catherine said dryly. Nashoba almost smiled. "You are braver than I thought. When this started, I believed you would be liability. Weakness." "I am weak," Catherine replied. "I'm terrified." "Courage is not lack of fear," Nashoba said. "It is moving forward despite fear. You are moving forward." They reached Tucson on the 3rd day, footsore and exhausted. The Congress Hotel was easy to find, a 2-story adobe building in the center of town. Edwin Porter was in his room, working on another story when Catherine and Nashoba knocked. He opened the door looking annoyed, then intrigued as Catherine explained who they were and why they'd come. "You're the laundress who married the scout," Porter said, recognition lighting his face. "I heard about that. Fort Gossip travels to Tucson. They said you were caught in inappropriate relations." "They lied," Catherine replied. "About that?" and about 12 murdered Apache men. I have documents, witness testimony, proof of murder and theft by Army officers. Will you publish it?" Porter looked at them for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. Tell me everything." They spent hours laying out the story, showing the documents, explaining the forced marriage, the threats, the systematic theft and murder. Porter listened, made notes, asked sharp questions that tested whether their story held together. Finally, he sat back. "This is explosive. If I publish it, there will be investigations. Possibly courts-martial. Definitely anger from territorial government." "So, you will not publish?" Neshoba asked, despair creeping into his voice. "I didn't say that," Porter replied. "I said it's explosive, which means it's exactly the kind of story I came to Arizona to find. I'll publish it. But you need to understand, this will make you targets. Hendricks will retaliate. The governor will want you silenced. You'll need protection." "How do we get that?" Catherine asked. "Go to the federal marshal," Porter said. "Tell him everything. My story will hit papers in a week. I have to send it to New York, get it printed, distributed. But if the marshal opens investigation now, before publication, he can move against Hendricks before Hendricks moves against you." It made sense, but trusting another official, another man with authority, felt like stepping back into the trap they'd just escaped. "The marshal is not territorial," Neshoba pointed out. "He answers to Washington, not the governor. It is worth attempting." Federal Marshal Thomas Webb was in his office when they arrived. He listened to their story with a face that revealed nothing, examined their documents with careful attention, and finally leaned back in his chair. "I've heard rumors about Hendricks," Webb said. "Nothing I could prove. But this—" He gestured to the papers. "This is proof. I'll open investigation immediately. Bring him in for questioning. Seize his records before he can destroy them." "He will know we came here," Catherine said. "He will know we provided this. And I'll make certain he understands that harm coming to either of you will be seen as retaliation and dealt with harshly," Webb replied. "I can't guarantee your safety permanently, but I can make the cost of touching you high enough that he thinks twice." It wasn't perfect protection, but it was more than they'd had. Webb moved fast. Within 2 days, Hendricks had been arrested and brought to Tucson. Crenshaw's warehouse had been raided, stolen goods documented. The investigation had teeth. But Hendricks had connections, money, and he'd been preparing for this possibility longer than Webb realized. The attack came on their 4th night in Tucson. Catherine and Neshoba were staying in a boarding house under Webb's protection. But protection only went so far when assassins could be hired for the price of a good horse. 3 men broke in after midnight. Catherine woke to Neshoba's hand over her mouth, his body pulling her down as gunshots shattered the window. They ran. Out the back, through alleys Catherine didn't know existed, while bullets splintered wood around them. Neshoba moved with the deadly grace of someone who'd spent years evading enemies, pulling Catherine along when she stumbled. They made it to the marshal's office. Webb was there, along with 2 deputies who'd been awakened by gunshots. The assassins didn't follow. Too public, too risky once federal law was alert. "That was Hendricks," Webb said grimly. "Even from a cell he has reach. I can put you in protective custody, but I can't watch you every second, not until trial." "When is trial?" Neshoba asked. 3 weeks, Webb replied. "Maybe longer if defense delays. Can you stay hidden that long?" "Do we have choice?" Catherine asked. They were moved to a safe house on the edge of town, a small adobe building with guards posted outside. For 3 weeks they lived in limbo, waiting for trial, while Porter's story spread through Eastern newspapers. The story changed everything. Suddenly, there was public attention, reformers demanding investigation, political pressure from Washington. The territorial governor scrambled to distance himself from Hendricks, claiming ignorance of any wrongdoing. And Catherine and Neshoba waited, trapped again but in a different way, not by forced marriage, but by protective custody that felt only marginally less restrictive. The trial was a spectacle. Reporters from 6 different newspapers, reformers from Eastern advocacy groups, territorial officials trying to prove they'd had no idea one of their captains was corrupt. Catherine testified about what she'd witnessed, Neshoba testified about the 12 men who'd gone to peace talks and never returned. Porter testified about the investigation his reporting had triggered. The documents were entered as evidence: supply records, ledgers, the governor's letter that suggested complicity. Hendrix's lawyer tried to discredit them. Called Catherine a disgraced woman who'd married a savage. Called Neshoba an unreliable native with grudge against white authority. Called the marriage itself proof that their testimony was manufactured conspiracy. But the evidence was too strong. The governor's letter too damning. The stolen goods too well documented. Captain Marcus Hendrix was convicted of 12 counts of murder, theft of government property, and conspiracy to defraud. He was sentenced to hang. The governor was not charged, not enough evidence of direct involvement. But the scandal destroyed his career. He resigned within a month. Silas Crenshaw was convicted of receiving stolen goods and served 3 years. And Catherine and Neshoba were finally free. Except freedom was more complicated than they'd imagined. The trial had made them famous, or infamous, depending on who you asked. The laundress and the scout who'd brought down a corrupt captain and a territorial governor. Heroes to reformers, traitors to those who benefited from the old system. They couldn't return to Fort Huachuca. The army had disbanded the scout unit, claimed budget cuts, but everyone knew it was retaliation for Neshoba's testimony. The other scouts and their families were now without work, without protection, forced onto reservations or into even more precarious positions. Neshoba felt that guilt like stones in his stomach. He'd saved 12 families from not knowing what happened to their loved ones. But he'd destroyed 30 families' livelihoods doing it. "You cannot carry that," Catherine told him one evening, as they sat in yet another temporary room, this one in a Tucson boarding house where the other residents whispered about them but didn't directly harass. "They needed that work," Neshoba replied. "I knew it would be cost. I chose revenge over their welfare." "You chose justice over convenience," Catherine corrected. "And you gave the other scouts choice. Stay and work for army that murdered your relatives, or find another way. That is not cruelty. That is clarity." Neshoba looked at her. This woman who'd been forced into his life, who'd become ally and partner and something he was afraid to examine too closely. "The marriage is still binding," he said quietly. "Judge Blackwood's ceremony was legal. We are still bound by that." "Unless we dissolve it," Catherine replied. "Now that Hendrix is convicted, now that the threat is gone, we could annul, claim it was coerced, which is true." "Is that what you want?" Neshoba asked. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. They'd been forced together by lies. But they'd built something true in the wreckage. Partnership. Trust. Something that felt like it might become more if they let it. "No," she said finally. "I don't want to dissolve it. But I want it to be real. Not built on Hendrix's manipulation, but on our choice." "Then we choose," Neshoba said. "We married once because we had to. We stay married because we want to." It wasn't a declaration of love. Neither of them were ready for that. Too much trauma, too much complication. But it was a declaration of partnership, of two people who'd been weaponized against each other deciding to rebuild what had been forced. They stayed in Tucson. Catherine found work sewing for a dress shop that didn't care about her history. Neshoba found work as translator for the federal marshal's office, helping negotiate with Apache bands who were being forced onto reservations. The work was heartbreaking, watching his people lose everything, being complicit in the system that destroyed them, even as he tried to make individual outcomes less brutal. But it was work that meant something. That gave voice to those who had none. And slowly, carefully, they built a life. Not the life either would have chosen in a perfect world, but a life chosen freely, built on truth instead of lies, partnership instead of coercion. 3 years after the trial, they stood in a small Tucson church and married again. This ceremony was different. Friends present, genuine smiles, vows they'd written themselves. 2 bears came from the reservation to witness, along with Kuruk and several other former scouts who'd found work in Tucson. The reverend who performed the ceremony asked a strange question. "You are already married. Why do this again?" Because the first marriage was trap, Neshoba replied. This marriage is choice. They didn't silence him by threatening his life, Catherine added. They silenced him by giving him someone to lose. But they forgot we could choose to be worth keeping. The Reverend smiled. Then by the power vested in me, and by your own free will already exercised, I bless what you have already built. May you continue choosing each other long after this ceremony ends. It was the best blessing they could have received. 5 years after that, they owned a small house on the edge of Tucson, with a daughter who had her father's dark eyes and her mother's pale hair. Catherine taught reading to Tohono O'odham children, whose parents wanted them to have tools for navigating the white world without losing themselves. Neshoba worked as consultant for lawyers defending native rights, advising on cases, providing testimony, using his bilingual skills to bridge worlds that didn't want bridging. The work was still heartbreaking. The system was still broken. The people were still being destroyed. But they made small differences, saved individual families, won cases that set precedents, created tiny islands of justice in an ocean of exploitation. And they did it together. Partners by choice rather than by coercion. One evening, as they watched their daughter chase fireflies in the yard, Neshoba said quietly, "I think about those 12 men sometimes. About whether this was worth their deaths." "It wasn't worth their deaths," Catherine replied. "Nothing could be worth that. But their deaths weren't meaningless, because we made certain the truth didn't die with them." "Hendricks hanged 3 years ago," Neshoba continued. "But men like him still exist, still murder, still steal. We changed nothing systemic." "We changed everything for the families who know what happened," Catherine said. "We changed everything for the scouts who weren't forced to serve the man who killed their relatives. We changed everything for each other. Systemic change is someone else's war. Ours was making certain one corrupt captain couldn't bury 12 bodies without consequence." Neshoba took her hand. "Do you ever regret it? Everything that happened? The marriage, the trial, this life we built?" Catherine considered the question seriously. She thought about the terrified young woman she'd been, gathering herbs near Sycamore Creek, about to witness horror that would derail her entire life, about being forced into marriage with a stranger who resented her, about becoming a weapon aimed at someone else's heart. But she also thought about discovering that stranger was actually an ally, about building trust in the ruins of manipulation, about choosing to stay when they could have walked away, about the daughter laughing in their yard and the small justice they'd carved from terrible circumstances. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. I regret what it cost. I regret that 12 men died. I regret what Hendricks did to both of us. But what we built after, what we chose, I would choose that again." Their daughter ran back to them, firefly cupped carefully in her hands. "Look," she said in the mixed English and Apache that was her first language. "I caught light." "Let it go," Neshoba said gently. "Light is not for catching. It is for appreciating while it lasts, then releasing to find its own path." The child opened her hands. The firefly rose into the darkness, blinking once before disappearing into the vastness. "Like us," Catherine said softly, watching it go. "We were caught. Then we chose to let go of everything that trapped us and find our own path." "Do you think we found it?" Neshoba asked. Catherine looked at him. This man who'd started as her prison and become her choice. "I think we're still finding it. Every day. Every small justice. Every time we choose each other again." He kissed her forehead. "Then I choose you again today, and tomorrow, and however many days we are given." "Even though I'm the woman who was forced on you by a corrupt captain?" "Especially because of that," Neshoba replied. "Because you proved that even what is forced can become freely chosen. That is stronger magic than any treaty or law." Inside the house, Catherine's students' homework waited to be reviewed. Neshoba's case files needed organizing. The ordinary work of their extraordinary choice. They went inside together, daughter between them, fireflies blinking in the darkness behind them like small reminders that even trapped light eventually escapes to find its own way home. The marriage had been designed to destroy them. Instead, they'd used it to destroy the system that created it. That wasn't the victory anyone expected. But it was the victory that mattered. And if someone asked whether love could grow from coercion, Catherine and Neshoba would say, no. Coercion only grows resentment. But when two coerced people choose to build something true from the ruins of manipulation, that's where love finds its foundation. Not in the first ceremony performed by a judge who called it an arrangement requiring mercy, but in every day after, when they woke up and chose each other again, despite having every reason to walk away. That choice, repeated daily, tested constantly, earned through truth, was more binding than any legal document. It was the marriage that mattered. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe.